we're gonna start off by making that form without using Formik. We're gonna be using native HTML form elements. What I did here was I started a React app. I use WebStorm to create this, but you guys can do the same thing by writing what I'm gonna write here. Let me just erase this real quick. Go to a folder and just write npx create React app. Then I named this app without Formik, and I personally like using TypeScript. Now this is completely optional, although I think everyone should be using TypeScript, but if you want your app to be TypeScript file, then you gotta write double hyphen template TypeScript and press enter. Now I already did that, and not only that, I personally like using prettier in my app, so I added prettier. So you guys don't do that if you guys want. All right, so once that's done, let's start this application. npm start. Let's wait for that to finish real quick. Let's see. Localhost 3000. All right, there you go. All right, so let's erase all the files that we don't need. So we don't need the CSS. We don't need the test files, the index, CSS, logo, React app environment, service workers, setup tests. Let's get rid of these. And let's first go to our index. We're getting an error here, but ignore that for now. Erase all of our unused dependencies. We don't need a service worker, so that's all we need here on our index. Now you could close the index because we're going to be doing most of our work on the app file. Get rid of these imports. The only import we need right now is the React. And for here, let's get rid of everything inside the outer div. And just to make sure everything's working fine, I'll just write hello here. There we go. All right, so we're gonna start off again making the form without using Formik, just using native HTML form elements. So the way that we typically do this is we first wrap our form with the form tag. And this form tag, let me just close it real quick. The form tag always needs to on submit, and we're gonna attach a function to this. So we're gonna be adding a method to this function-based component. By the way, I always like to build my React apps these days using functional components. I don't like class-based components anymore because we have hooks now. So that's what we're gonna be doing here. So let's call this function, what should we call it? Handle submit. Obviously it's not defined yet, that's why it's red. So let's define it as a method here. Const handle submit. Because I'm using TypeScript, I have to call it any. I'll just call it any for now. All right, so let's see, we'll just leave the empty for now. How about let's just build up the form real quick. Let's just get the UI working first, and then we'll add in the functionalities later. Let's make two divs, one for each of the input, for the email input and the password input. The first thing we need is a label, HTML4. We're gonna call our two fields, one is gonna be called email, the other one's gonna be called password. So this one label is gonna be for the email input. We're gonna write email. Right below the label, we want the input type text. The name of this again is gonna be email. And we can just close the tag, and then that's it for now. Let's go to our second div. Let's just copy this part. And for this one, we're gonna call it password, like so. And when I make YouTube videos, there's something that really bugs me. I don't like these popping up like that. So let's just write auto complete off. Did I spell that wrong? Yeah, I think she ought to be lowercase. Oh no, sorry. It's not for the label, it's for the input. It is uppercase, capital case. Off complete off. There you go. That way we don't get that drop down. All right, so our two inputs are done, and let's add our two buttons. So button one, this one is going to be type submit because it's going to submit the form, and our next button is just going to be a ordinary button, and we're going to call it reset. There we go. So this is pretty much the form that we had in the last video. So obviously we have no functionalities. Notice the submit is enabled at all times because we didn't add any disabling functionalities. So one thing we have to do in React when you don't use any form libraries, we like to make all of our inputs in our React app a controlled input. What we mean by that is we want React to know everything that we're typing in here. For example, if I write Justin here on the email input, right now this component has no idea that I have written Justin here. So we want React to be the source of all truth, meaning we want React to display the value here, and we want React to handle whenever we have an on-change event, such as I'm doing here. So the way that we do that is we need variables, in this case using states, and we have to introduce two state variables, one that will control the input of the email and the other that will control the input of the password. So let's do that right now. So we know in a functional component, we need to use the useState function. So I'm going to import that first, and let's define our two state variables. So the first one, I'm just going to call it email. Set email. This is how you define hooks. useState. Our initial state of our variable is just going to be an empty string. And then const password, that's our second variable. Set password. useState. Again, we're going to initialize it as an empty string. Let's put semicolons here so that ESLint doesn't complain anymore. And now that we have introduced these state variables into our app, let's connect our inputs so that they will read the values of these variables. The way that we do that is here, put a value to both our inputs, and our value is gonna be the variable email. And here, the input, the value is gonna be the variable password. Whoops, not the string password, but the variable password. All right, so now they're plugged in. If I try typing something here, doesn't work because we didn't define the on change event here. And the reason why it's always an empty string on both of these, no matter what I type, is because they're just showing whatever string that these variables contain, that these state variables contain. So now let's define the on change event handlers for both of these inputs. And the way that we do that is we put an on change event handler here. We're going to define a method called on email change or handle email change, doesn't really matter. And for this input, whoops, on change handle password change. There's more than one ways to do this, but I'll just do it like this. Some people like to make these into one method, so it's probably a more cleaner way to write things, but whatever. Let's define those two methods, handle email change. And I'll define this one later because it's gonna be for the most part very close to this handle email change. So we could just copy and paste and then change the method name later. All right, so what we're gonna do is grab the e parameter, the event parameter that this on change comes with, and let's just type it in for now. Let's see. The value of what we type is in the e.target.value. So let's do this, set email. That's how we update this variable here by using this set email that it comes with. And we are gonna set our email variable as e.target.value. Whoops, ignore that for now. It's because we didn't define this yet. So let's go ahead and define that right now. Copy this whole method, paste that in. We'll rename it to handle password change. And then instead of setting the email this time, we'll set the password. So now if we have coded everything correctly, let me close this terminal. If we coded everything correctly, then we should have what we left off with in the beginning. Meaning we could type here and we could see whatever we type. There you go. All right, so that's done. And before we go on, I just want us to take care of our handle submit. So I didn't show you guys this in the previous video, but when I click this submit button, I want us to see on the console our email input and our password input. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's do console log. Email is, and I'm going to use a string interpolation. ES6 string interpolation. Email is going to be from our variable email, and password is from our variable password. All right, I'm intentionally leaving something out here for now. Now let's see what happens. I'm going to write test@gmail.com. Password is going to be pass123. Oh, notice, I don't know if you guys saw that, but there was something that was written here for a split second and then it went away. And the reason why I did that is because forms, naturally, whenever we click a submit button, aka notice here, we wrote the type submit, we redirect the page to, we submit the form essentially and redirect the page elsewhere. So we don't want to do that in a single page application. So what we always need, without using any React form libraries, we always need to grab this E and to prevent default. That way we'll prevent the default behavior of our form submission, which is to actually submit the form. If we do this, notice email, password. So that's probably not the best example. So let me just write a pseudo realistic email here and a pseudo password here. All right, there you go. So our form is kind of working. Now, again, we don't have this reset button working, although I'll probably do that next because it's pretty easy to do. We don't have any errors here to display, and our submit is always enabled. Even when our form is empty, it's still enabled. And again, we want to have 3 criteria for this form to be submittable. We want both of these fields are required. The email must be a valid email, and the password must be at least 8 characters in length. So let's now let's take care of our reset button, because that's relatively simple to do. So let's define a new method. We're gonna call const handle reset. Doesn't take in any parameters, we don't need any. And all we're gonna do is, for now, although we gotta do some more things later, we're gonna reset our email variable and our password variable to empty strings. So the way that we do that is set email into an empty string, set password into an empty string. There we go. Now we gotta connect this to our reset button down here by using the onClick property handle reset. All right, let's see if that works. Test gmail.com dolphin. Now let's click reset and everything goes away. That's what we want. All right. Now let's introduce strings here. I'm not sure what to call it. Let's introduce errors here to our app, so that when we don't have one of the criteria fulfilled, then we will display the errors here. And the way that there's more than one way to do this, the way that I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna introduce more states into our app. We're gonna manage 2 more states. One that's gonna be called email error, and one that's gonna be called password error. So that will pretty much, and that will contain, if we have an error, that will contain the text of our errors. If we don't have errors, then it will just be an empty string. So let's just put it here, const email error, set email error, use state, again an empty string, we'll do that for now, and then below the password, not email, password error, set password error, use state. And as a matter of fact, just to test it out, because I want to display it right here and right here, let's write something here. Email error, password error, just to test it out. Now we want to display them right next to our input. So let's go there. Let me just expand this a little bit. There you go. Let's put a span element, and I will put inside the span the email error next to our email input, and next to our password input we'll put another span, password error. Now let's see if those are displaying properly. There we go. All right, now we know that we can see them, so let's make these empty again. And whenever we change something, whenever we type something in here, we want to be making sure that our criteria are met. So the way that we do that is in our onChange method handlers for our email and our password, we gotta be checking to see if whatever we have typed in fulfills the criteria that we have set. So let's do the easy criteria first. The easy one is email cannot be empty and the password cannot be empty. So the way that we do this is this. Let's first set our email and set our password variable like what we did. After that, let's do this. If whatever we have typed in, e.target.value, has a length that is 0, so one way we could do that is this, triple equals 0, or to be concise, we could say if it's not that, meaning if the length is 0, then this will become true. Then we will do something. But notice we're doing something that's kind of redundant. We have e.target.value here and then another e.target.value. So what we can do is extract that into its own variable. So we can call it const, what should we call it? Input. And we will extract the e.target.value and then refactor our code a little bit and use our new input variable like so. So if our input length is 0, meaning if we didn't write anything in here in these forms, then we're going to set an error. Set, in this case, because we're doing handle email change, set email error into the string that we want to display if they didn't type anything in is this field is required. We could do the same thing for password because he has the same criteria, at least for this one. And let's extract the input variable for this one as well. Replace this with input and just copy this, paste it over here. But instead of setting the email error, we want to set the password error for this one. Now let's see if that works. I refresh the page, type something in, decide to change my mind, erase everything, and tab up. Notice that our error showed up. And here, when I erase everything, the error shows up. So that's kind of good. That's not really ideal. The reason which I will explain in a little bit. Let's just finish our criteria. So the second criteria that I want us to do is for the password to be at least 8 characters in length. So we could put an else if here on the end, handle password change method. Else if the input.length is less than 8 characters in length, then we have another error. set password error. This no, we won't say this field. We'll say password must be at least 8 characters. Let's see if that works. Refresh the page. Password must be at least 8 characters, and let's type 8. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, and we still have the error. Why is that? It's because we need a final condition for the password. If it's not empty and if it's not less than 8, then we have no error. So we want to update our state, set our password error state into an empty string again. Let's see if that works. So again, if we have nothing, this field is required. The moment we start typing, password must be at least 8 characters, and then after our 8th one, it goes away. If we do that again, it comes back. So that's good. Now let's take care of our email validation. This one's a little bit harder because we've checked to see that it is not empty here. Now we gotta check to make sure that it is a valid email. So this is fairly complicated, but probably the easiest way to do this is using regular expressions, aka regex. And I am by no means a regex pro, but what I am pretty good at is Googling to get the correct regex that I need. That's what we're gonna do right now, is we're gonna write email regex. Email address regular expression that works 99.99% of the time. That's good enough for me. And let's get this disgusting lines of code and let's copy that. That's probably an overkill for our app, but whatever. Let's go to the top of our app and we're just gonna define the email regex like so. And in JavaScript, regex are always encased in between two forward slashes. Is that what it's called? Forward slashes. And in between, we will paste what we have just copied. All right, so that's good. Now, how we test to see if whatever we have typed in is the correct email format is we do this. So let's first write an else if here. We grab our email regex variable that we have just defined, and we use this thing called test. And what we're testing is we're testing our input inside. So this will be true if whatever we have typed in our, close this, whatever we have typed in our regex, what is this? Expression denied. Doesn't like the fact that we don't have that. This will be true if we have typed in a valid email here, like so. And it will be false otherwise. So if we type something like this, it will be false. Now, we want to only set an error if it's false, meaning it's not a valid email. So we're just going to put an exclamation point in the beginning, and that should do it. And once that's done, if it's not a valid email, then we will set another error. It will be must be a valid email. That will be our error string. And again, just like the password, we need a third condition. If it's not empty and if it's a valid email, then we have no email error. So make that into an empty string. Now let's see if that works. Refresh the page. No string. This field is required. I'll type in a valid email. There you go. There it goes away. Again here. There it goes away. All right, so that's pretty much done. Now, it's not ideal because one, we don't want this to be constantly yelling at us as we're typing in our correct password. That's not a good user experience. Ideally, we only want the error to show up after we have tabbed away or clicked outside of this input. That is a cleaner user experience. So we call that event an on blur. So notice right now it's yelling at me. until I write a valid email. We want these errors to only show up if I wrote something that's incorrect and then I either tabbed away or I clicked away. So that's called an on blur, and that's what we're gonna try to do now. So the reason why it's constantly yelling at me right now, it's because every time I type something in, I'm triggering this on change event here, handle email change, and within that function, this method here, we are either setting the error or erasing the error. So instead of having this in here, we want to have it on blur whenever we either tab away or click away from our input. So we gotta have it here, have a new property called on blur, and we will define a new function, handle email blur. And we know we gotta do the same thing for our password input. So let's make one here, handle password blur. And let's define our new methods here, const handle email blur. We don't need any parameters for now. If we need them, we'll put them in later. And let's pretty much just copy this. Actually, we do need it. Nah, we don't need it. Let's copy this. Notice he's complaining about our input because that was within the scope of this method, this handle email change. So within this scope, we don't have the input variable. Now, where can we grab our input variable? Meaning, whatever we have typed in for our email input. Here, we grabbed it from the e.target.value of our event handler. Don't want that. But there is another place where we could grab it, and it's within our React component, specifically this email state variable here. So this will contain, because we're setting it, every time we type something in here, we're setting that variable into whatever we have typed. We have access to whatever we have typed in this variable here. So we could just replace this one and this one with our email variable, and that should work. Now that we have added our validations on the blur, we could get rid of them on the change. He's still complaining that we don't have this. So what I'm gonna do, let's just finish it. Grab this console email handle email blur, paste that in here, and call this handle password blur. Get rid of the inside, grab this guy and put it in here. Replace the input again. We have access to the password from our password variable, like so. And then we could get rid of it in our handle password change. All right, so that should be good. Our app built, so that's fine. That's good. Notice we're not getting any errors right now, even though this is not a correct email. And even though this is an empty string, before it was constantly yelling at us, it's not doing that any longer, so that's good. Now if we tab away, that's when it shows us, so that's good. And now I clicked away from here and it showed us. Now let's see, does it show us for incorrect email? Yes, it does. Does it show us for password less than 8 characters? Yes, it does. What if we type something correct in? Goes away, and we have 8 length here, and it goes away. So that's good. So this is a better user experience. And we did that by using this onBlur method on our inputs. So notice already our code is getting pretty long. Not only that, our submit button is always enabled, even if we have errors. And let's see what happens right now. Notice we have errors here. Let's see what happens if I click reset right now. Actually, let me just type something in here so that we can see. Let's click reset. Both of our inputs are empty, which is what we want, but we still have these errors showing up here. So when we click reset, ideally, we want all of our errors to go away too. So what we can do is in our handle reset method, clear our errors too. So set email, set password into empty string, and then set email error, whoops, into an empty string, and our set password error into an empty string, like so. Let's see if that worked. Reset. All right. Now, our final thing that we have to take care of is disabling this submit button until our 3 criteria are set. So the way that we do that is, let's define a new variable here. We will write const submit is disabled. And submit will be disabled if we have an email error, if this is an empty string, then this will be false. But if it's not an empty string, it will be true. So, or we have a password error, and that's it for now. Let's see if that works. Obviously that did nothing because we're not using this variable. Let's put it here in our submit button. We'll use the disabled property. It will be disabled if our variable submit is disabled is true, like so. Why is that? Type string is not assignable to, okay, so this TypeScript complaining. So right now he thinks he's a string. And the reason for that is because technically it is, although this should work in JavaScript, but to appease the TypeScript, we will just double bang it to make it into a Boolean value. So what this will do is, if our email error is some string that is not empty like so, one exclamation point will make it a false, and then a not of a false will become true. Likewise, if we have an empty string, one not operator on it will become true, another one will make it false. All right, refresh, there you go. Right now, notice it's enabled right now. That's not what we want, and we'll take care of that in a little bit. But once we have errors, it is disabled. All right, so why is it that in the beginning it's enabled? Because technically in the beginning we have no errors. So what we have to do is we have to introduce another variable, and that is in the beginning, if the form, we use the word, if the form is not touched, then we want the submit to be disabled. So I'm going to introduce 2 more variables. They're going to be const email is touched, and these will be a Boolean value. We will default it as false because in the beginning the email input has not been touched, they haven't been tampered with. And we're gonna have one more for the password. Set password is touched. And we're gonna say the submit is disabled if we have an email error, or we have a password error, or our form hasn't been touched. And the way that we get that is the form hasn't been touched if email is touched. If not, email has been touched, and the password hasn't been touched. That should be true. All right, see, notice now it's disabled. But the problem is, even if you have a valid email, valid form like this, it's still disabled. It's because we haven't made this true once they are touched. So the way that we do that is handle email change on the onChange event handlers. The moment we mess with them, we tamper them, we want to set these variables as true. So let's do that here. Handle email change. We could do set email is touched as true, and on our handle password change, set password is touched as true. Let's see if that works. It's disabled. Moment I type, it's enabled. Now this is not a good user experience because technically, I mean, what am I talking about? Not user experience, but this is not correct. This should not be enabled right now. So what I did wrong is, instead of putting the set email is touched and set password is touched as true on the On change event, let's put it on the blur, like so. On email blur, put the set email is touched, it's true, and on password blur, set password is touched as true. Now notice it's not enabling right now. That's what we want. But, and why is it still enabled right now? Not email is touched, or actually we could do this, or it should be an or, meaning submit is disabled if either one of these hasn't been touched. We need both of them to be touched for our submit is disabled to be true. So this is the correct way. I'm sorry about that. So meaning our submit is disabled if we have an email error, we have a password error, if the email input hasn't been touched, or if the password input hasn't been touched. So that should do it. Refresh. And then password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We tab away, and the submit is enabled. That's good. Now it did something a little bit fishy that I don't like. Check this out. Write a valid email, write a valid password, and I notice right now it's still disabled. I have to click away for it to be enabled, and that's the reason for that is we set the set email is touched and the set password is touched to true on the blur, meaning once we tab away, then it will update our touched variables once we tab away. So this again is not a good user experience, but whatever. When we make this form in Formik, it will take care of this automatically. So I think this is good enough for me. Let's just make sure our form submits. Yep, the form has successfully submitted here. So this is how we make a form using native HTML form elements. Our code is roughly 81 lines of code, and actually there's one thing I forgot. So on the handle reset, we want to also set the set email is touched back to false, because once we reset, it's no longer touched, and set password is touched to false. And now we're done. So our form using native HTML without Formik is 83 lines of code, and it's fairly complicated. We introduced 6 variables here. Got this crazy regex in here. We needed on blur events for both of our inputs, on change events for both of our inputs, and we had to make both of our inputs are controlled inputs by having an on change and by having the value properly. So in the next video, I will show you guys how to do this using Formik.